Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 6th of June in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking about a recent attack on one leg of Russia's nuclear triad, what that means for the United States, for Europe, and of course for Russia. This, I suppose, is the second part of my Castle Report, which focused on the changing face of war and my conclusion that it means the end of the aircraft carrier as the dominant force of naval warfare, the end of the tank as the dominant force of land warfare. Yes, the blitzkrieg of Heinz Guderian, the great carrier battles, are most likely relics of past wars now, but the future of war looks even more terrifying to me. Why? Well, because death now comes from an unmanned robot controlled by some technician, perhaps thousands of miles away in some Quonset hut with little or no human interaction. Today, the attack by Ukraine deep inside Russia severely damaged Russia's strategic nuclear delivery system. The three great nuclear powers, the U.S., Russia, and China, all have what is normally referred to as a nuclear triad, which prevents any leg of the three-legged stool from keeping that nation from responding to a nuclear attack. That triad consists of long-range nuclear bombers, submarine-launched nuclear missiles, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. The triad of final nuclear defense prevents either of the three nations from final defeat in a total nuclear catastrophe, which would leave the victor without much to celebrate over and over. I warned that total defeat of Russia is not possible while that nation's missiles are still in their silos. Their submarines still patrol the oceans. Nevertheless, a few days ago, Ukraine launched a massive drone attack 2,700 miles inside Russia, which destroyed several of Russia's long-range strategic bombers. Initial reports said 41 planes were destroyed, but even Ukraine admits now that the number was more like 13 destroyed, several more damaged. The Russians say only 5 were destroyed, so we can conclude that some were destroyed, but how many is anyone's guess. Apparently, these bombers were some of Russia's most prized aerial assets, were vital to their nuclear triad. These aircraft were of a type no longer in production, so replacing them will be very difficult, very costly, if it is even possible. In response, Russia, of course, launched its own massive drone attack inside Ukraine with 472 drones, 7 ballistic and cruise missiles. That will not be the end of the Russian response, because Putin told President Trump in a recent phone call that he will have to respond, so maybe the deep state is close to getting its war. By the way, folks, as an aside, I read where Russia is building 2 million of the types of drones that attack their aircraft. But this attack was more than just a bold and aggressive strike deep inside Russia against Russian air bases. It was a glaring example of the new face of war that is unlike anything this world has seen before. The Ukrainians proved with one attack how outdated the old aircraft carrier on the seas, the battle tanks on the land now are, that made their own aircraft carrier out of a semi-truck, and they transported that carrier full of armed drones into Russia using Russian personnel, or at least people who appeared to be Russian. I have seen conflicting reports, but recent after-action reports say 36% of Russian strategic aircraft worth about $2 billion were destroyed. This attack came on Sunday, the day before peace talks were held in Turkey to try to resolve the conflict. It gave Zelensky a chance to brag about just having destroyed another chance at peace. Anyway, the peace talks went nowhere, reportedly lasted only 3 hours, so all that work, all that preparation, and expense apparently for nothing. Sometimes it seems to me that everyone in charge of anything in this world is crazy. Maybe that's a kind of quiet requirement of seeking and holding power. Only the truly insane need apply. Mr. Zelensky made a speech at the start of negotiations, which was part gloating, part thank you to Europe and America for sending their best weapons, which allowed him to wound the nuclear bear. Quote from Mr. Zelensky, quote, "First, as before, our top priority is supporting our defense. I am grateful for all the support packages, for every investment in weapons production in Ukraine, and for the development of production in your countries as well. Europe, together with America, has better weapons than Russia. Our Operation Spiderweb yesterday proved that Russia must feel what its losses mean, end quote. That's just a few lines from his longer speech, but its meaning is pretty clear. It confirms to the world that this attack was from Europe and America against Russia. It seems to be the hot version of a war that has been raging against Russia since peace was declared in 1989. That peace was to end the Cold War, but it just passed the war from cold to hot. But you say that makes no sense. You're correct, of course. It makes no sense unless you're insane and want to gamble with the lives of everyone on planet Earth. Apparently, there are plenty of people very anxious to do that thing. Since Mr. Zelensky gave America and Europe some credit for this attack against the Russian bomber fleet based all the way up in Siberia, we should look at the actual planning and execution of that mission, and for that we consult the CIA. To do that, we have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, as quoted from an interview he did with Judge Andrew Napolitano. He said that the U.S. would likely give President Trump plausible deniability so he could wash his hands of it. The attack was personally planned and commanded by Mr. Zelensky, they tell us, but I don't need a CIA analyst to conclude that can't be true. However, Mr. Johnson doesn't believe it either. Quote, sorry, folks, but I don't buy that. This attack was not something a guy like Zelensky, whose skill set of being a former homoerotic dancer and actor, was prepared for. The official line is that the president did not know about it, but his recent warnings to Mr. Putin might lead one to conclude he was embarrassed by Mr. Putin's refusal to accept terms and end the war. The president promised us he could end the war, but every time he tries, someone throws a monkey wrench into his Nobel Peace Prize. So perhaps the president was living up to his warning that something very bad was going to happen. Perhaps, on the other hand, this attack was planned before he took office, and he really didn't know, because apparently he didn't know that swarms of Ukrainian drones attacked Putin's helicopter near Moscow in an effort to assassinate him. Apparently, Mr. Johnson concluded that this attack, which was 2,700 miles inside Russia, far away from the front lines in Ukraine, had to have been orchestrated by NATO and the CIA. Quote, in a NATO proxy war against Russia, with Ukraine serving as the proxy, somebody in Washington and/or London had to have been involved in an operation as sophisticated and strategic as the one that went down in Russia on Sunday. I guarantee you, at least one, if not more, officers within the Central Intelligence Agency knew about this and may have been involved with the planning for it and the operation of it, end quote. When Judge Napolitano pressed him on how sure he was of CIA, MI6, or Mossad involvement, he said, quote, 100%. Just the operations of initiating or turning the drones on. Think of the process. You've got them hidden under this roof, so the roof has to open up. That requires an external command. The reports are that they were using the Russian phone network. Well, maybe. But I think Starlink, Elon Musk's operation, was involved with this as well. It was reported that the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was watching the attack in real time, which means, if true, he absolutely knew it was coming on, end quote. Well, so Mr. Johnson, an experienced streetwise CIA analyst, is 100% sure that someone in the CIA was at least aware of this attack, may have been involved in executing it. What does that tell us about the U.S. government? To me, saying the president didn't know is not believable, except for the plausible deniability excuse, because I just don't see Mr. Zelensky risking U.S. wrath, even if he had the ability to do it. The only other possibility is that the CIA is now so independent, it is literally a separate government. Is the president in charge of this country, or is it the CIA, as rumors continue to suggest? This is a sobering thought, because many voted for this man because he pledged to end the war. If he just can't persuade them to stop fighting, I understand that. What I don't understand is why the U.S. continues to fund the fighting and the bloodshed. I sound like a broken record, I know, but I'm thinking that we are ruled by a tiny elite somewhere that really enjoys killing. If the president knew about this attack, I hope he didn't know about it, folks, because he loses credibility as a peacemaker. Furthermore, I predict this attack will have the opposite effect that it was intended to have. Rather than bring Russia to the bargaining table, as Mr. Zelensky thought it would, I predict that Russian gloves are going to come off. We're headed for World War III against Russia. It's a stupid, murderous avenue, but that's the way it appears to me. In conclusion, folks, this attack, which apparently took months to plan, was executed the day before peace talks began. That tells me that someone or some group did not want the talks to be successful because the war must go on. Peace with Russia is something the average insane lunatic just cannot permit. Finally, folks, we plunge on and on every day. We get closer to the world of all digital, all-knowing total surveillance powered by artificial intelligence, but our overlords must think that war is necessary for us to get there. Perhaps when their dream is realized, we will beg for their help to end it. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.